Well, I've just been working on my RTV 900. The fuel gauge just suddenly stopped working. So I went through and I traced the wires and couldn't find any breaks or damaged wires or anything pulled or anything like that. Knowing that basically the fuel gauge is kind of just like a little amp gauge, and so is the engine temp gauge. I swapped them and that gauge worked. So I figured, well, it's time to take apart the gauge. So what I ended up doing is on the back end, I just kind of pushed it around with a screwdriver, rolled it out until the edge was open enough to slip it off the plastic. And then I was able to release this and its little backing piece, which are slid inside the mirror. Basically they're just like press fit in. So these popped out. And then I was able to take the little gauge face out by winging it up and underneath the needle, making sure I don't damage the needle. And the final thing was the screw, which had to come out, which goes right into the center of the gauge. Let me show you the inside. So here's the center of the gauge, and there's the slots where the pegs go through, and then this is where it plugs in. So basically I just pulled the guts straight out, and as you can already see, looks like there's a bit of a problem there. Coil itself seems okay. The lights were working. Oddly enough, the lights are LEDs, which I was pretty impressed with. That was kind of interesting that they would go such an advanced thing like that in 2005. As you can see, the resistors here look pretty sketchy. It's like that resistor's been baked or something. Seeing as this kind of sits back and leans like that, I think this is just all stuff that came off from the board and melted to it because it got hot. I'm not sure if you can really see this terribly well or not, but the traces on this upper one aren't even really, they don't even really have any solder in them. That one there doesn't have much. You can see this one here has a little, but it's crappy looking. And it's not as much on that end of it right there. And if you flip it over, there's like little solder blobs, but they're just not great. Like this one goes to that trace, which makes sense. This one here goes to this trace here. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to be blocking you there. But this one here, whoops, hangs out in mid-space. There's nothing there. So that means that trace is on this side of the board because it's a two-sided board. You can see it comes around to there. So if there's no solder here, I'm really not sure how that thing managed to make contact over there other than occasional luck. So I think what I may end up trying is I may try to resolder those connectors and then see how that shakes out. It's a little better. Still pretty scudulant. We still on camera here? Yeah, I guess we are. Whoops. Go this way. That one's much nicer. Really like to get that on that other one. This other one's just really crappy looking. Give that one more shot. If it doesn't fill, I'm just going to call it. Because you mess around with something like this too much, and you'll just end up... I mean, there's no surface mount devices on this bad boy or anything, but still not going to do it any good to be... There we go. Still not going to do it any good to be filling it up too much. Alright, so at least it's going through now. Well, heck, let's see if that works. Get her plug back in there. Alright, I'm going to call that. Cool. Now we'll stick her back together and see if I can shove it back in the hole, and we'll see how that goes. Alright, so we got our holes here. drop down into there. Well, that went easier than expected. You can see your wires are sticking through the back now, or your posts anyways. So now I get this little screw. Toss that back into the center, and that's what secures it. Alright, this part's a little delicate because there's no real pretty way of doing this. So you just kinda wing it on through there. And it should stop when it reaches. It's held in by like little guide nibs. But I just want to make sure it's down far enough so it's just not gonna hold up the gauge. Alright. And this piece goes in, and this will be the standoff to make sure that everybody's in and not moving around. Also allows me to push it in a little harder. I get my glass there with this little ring toward the inside. I should actually spend a quarter of a second to clean the inside of that. I'm using a high-tech methodology of cleaning the inside of that lens. Trade secret. Can't show you what I'm doing. Both sides of the glass. There. You'll never know what I did, but it's perfectly clear now. Science. Now there's an O-ring in here, and this O-ring will push up against here. Actually, I probably should put the glass in here first. Yep, there we go. Get that in there first, then put it on the gauge. Be a little easier, maybe. There. Now I got to figure out how to bend that over without destroying it any more than I already have. I think I'm just going to use the pliers. I haven't seen anybody do this in a more delicate fashion. I'm sure there's plastic tools that you can use to do this, and there's probably a bunch of different things specifically designed for bending these gauge bezels back over, but I don't know. I don't have one. If you do, I'd love to see a video on how this works. I've yet to run into one. It's kind of difficult to shrink the stuff back in, so I just work it around in a circle while bending it over at the same time and keeping pressure in, because obviously you want that O-ring to be able to do something there, and it's not going to do anything if you didn't have pressure on it to begin with. I mean, I've seen people grip right around the front before I go crank it, but that's just not a great way to do it, and the front end of the face of the gauge looks like crap. Like, at least now, this is terrible if you look at it from the back, but how many people do you know that look at the back of a gauge? I'm going to bet not many. So you basically got to keep working it around a little bit just to shrink it up as much as you can. Then there was an O-ring around this that helped apply tension in the dash, so I'm going to see if I've got something in my my O-ring desk. There. That's good. I'll bring you back after I find an O-ring, hopefully. Alright, found myself an O-ring. Not exactly the right size, but it's the size I'm going to go with. I'll try and roll it over there. I can force it into position. That's all I need. Good. Pretty hideous, but that ought to stay. Alright, so I got the notch lined up, shoved the fuel gauge in, and boom, she's cured. And yes, it actually really is over full, because I ended up putting diesel in it when I saw the gauge was down below red, which should have been an indicator to me that something was up, but it wasn't. I just figured, well, maybe the kid ran it around and didn't tell me that he ran low on diesel. But I ended up filling it up, and when I filled it up in the garage, it's dark in there, couldn't really tell, and then the next time I turned the ignition on, obviously that didn't work out super awesome. So now we're over full for a little bit. No problem. I'm using the cup holder as a way to access the space in there. Alright, cured. Another RTV back on the road again. But I'm going to have to order another gauge. I can just see this one's not going to have a long life.